Okay, so good afternoon. Now, I will be doing a couple of live streams today. I'll be doing one before France Scotland, which is this one, and then one after France Scotland has completed in the Six Nations today. So there's a fair bit to talk about. And where to begin? We've obviously got the League Cup final this evening between Manchester United and Newcastle at Wembley. So that'll be very, very interesting. It's Newcastle's first cup final since 1999, and you know, there's a lot of talk behind the proposed potential takeover of Manchester United, the potential sale by the Glazer family, and of course the recent takeover of Newcastle United and Arab money in the game. Six Nations, Wales, what's going wrong there? We could discuss that to death. Very poor performance yesterday by the Welsh side. I think Warren Gatland. I don't know if if the players are buying into what Gatland wants them to do. But three performances, three defeats, no losing bonus points, bottom of the Six Nations table. The other nations are further ahead than they are. And yes, the Welsh Union avoided a strike, but it's a sticking plaster. It's a temporary measure with what they've done in regard to the uh, reducing the number of caps for what we class as senior players before they can play overseas, and payments that they it's a sticking plaster because a couple a year or two down the road will be here again. The issues with Welsh rugby go back decades financially, and with all the build up to the game being overshadowed for the last couple of weeks by the potential of a player strike, um, yeah, it is what it is. Then obviously we have news from North America with AT&T Comcast pulling out of broadcasting, which is Warner Brothers Discovery, out of sports broadcasting on the regional broadcast. They're losing too much money. They've given the NHL teams until March to come up with a solution. They've basically stated, yeah, you can have the broadcast rights, you can have the equipment, and they've got to come to some kind of arrangement with them, which is a further blow to the TV deal that the NHL and other major leagues have signed in North America. Major League Baseball, for example, is basically told Bally Sports, regardless of the bankruptcy situation and how they restructured the company, that if they do enter bankruptcy, Major League Baseball said, no, we're tearing up the agreement that we've signed with you. Um, and now the major leagues in North America have got contingency plans in place should Bally Sports go belly up before end of season. And AT&T Comcast, which is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, yeah, they're basically in a month's time they're done with sports broadcasting. So the major leagues in North America, apart from the NFL, have got a bit of a head scratcher. Regional broadcasting is dying basically. So nearly half the NHL is impacted. I think half the NBA is impacted as well. Major League Baseball, their season hasn't even started yet, and that will have a knock-on impact for the Major League Baseball's income streams this coming season. And with all the issues Major League Baseball's faced in recent years, that's going to be interesting how that plays out. And there's growing frustration with fans with regional blackouts and accessibility and how the coverage is presented to fans. In regards to Manchester United and the Glazers being at Wembley, that's going to be interesting with how the fans respond to the Glazers um, being at Wembley and with what's going on behind the scenes with a proposed sale to either to Jim Ratcliffe or the Qatari group. There's a lot going on there. Obviously, with with the way that the Saudi-led takeover, well, the Saudi-backed takeover, should I say, of Newcastle was delayed and blocked and hampered. It'd be pretty rich if if Man United get taken over by Qatari money. That will go down like an absolute crock of shite, basically, because the hypocrisy within the game is there. And I've been doing my club histories and all that lately, um, and it's it's an interesting one because baseball stadiums are so empty during the regular. Yeah, this has been a regular thing that's come up quite regularly. Is baseball attendance figures are dropping, and yeah, you've got to take COVID into that consideration as well, which will impact average attendances and the figures for a couple of years. But even before COVID, even before the lockout and the issues that we faced over the last 3 years, baseball attendances have been falling for some time. Um, and so baseball's got an issue, big problem, and I've discussed it before in regards to how they market their products. The fact that association football, soccer to North Americans, is now more participated than ice hockey and baseball at youth level and community level is another thing. So less people are playing the game. Aging fan base, which is much older than the other sports. And as I say, less kids and teenagers playing the game. More more people turning their backs on it. Really. As I say, the average age of fans in Major League Baseball and minor league baseball is 10 years older than the equivalent sports, as in rival sports in North America. Oh, look, I've got nothing against baseball per se. I'm a cricket fan, and people say, "Oh, cricket's boring." I like the shorter formats of cricket, but I still don't mind a 5-day Test match, if that makes sense. Obviously, weather conditions permitting, but it's the way they're marketing themselves. The fact that the London series, now I will always hark back to this. Now I know I've got a lot of North American viewers, and I'm doing some content in regards to. I will be doing video content in regards to ITV Digital, for example, and the rise and fall of ITV Digital, and that TV collapse and the impact it had on British sport. Because when I was doing the Barnsley video yesterday, in my research, I found out that because of the collapse of ITV Digital and how ITV really failed in their marketing and not only that, but also failed to really understand how much it was actually going to cost them to basically try and outbid Sky and compete with Sky and then compete with the international like broadcasters like Eurosport, who had been more established, better backing, better structures. It was a disaster. So some of my American viewers obviously are Major League Baseball fans, and some of my Australian viewers may like baseball as well because it's quite a popular sport in Australia. But the issue with Major League Baseball is how they've dealt with a lot of problems. They are the worst major league for labour unrest, so unrest between the team owners, the league, and the players. Multiple player strikes, multiple lockouts. I mean, the NHL doesn't even come close to labour unrest in regards to professional sports in North America. Their marketing isn't great. I will agree with that. The London series before COVID, they used Jimmy Carr as the British celebrity that they signed up to try and sell the game to international tourists and Brits, and it went down like a sack of shit. Is the best way to describe it. In the build up to the London series, I obviously was looking at it, and they used Jimmy Carr, and that was an absolute marketing disaster. Whoever told them to do that deserves to have their head examined because I understand that Jimmy Carr, he's a very successful comedian. Controversial, yes, but very, very successful. Fine. They've looked at the fact that he's a big name in comedy, and they went with it. And it was an absolute blunder because at the time, not long before, he had been involved in his tax affair scandal with his tax avoidance scheme, which was totally legal but morally wrong. And there were question marks over some of his comedic content. So he was he's a very controversial figure, and so that didn't go down well. Um, in regards to the percentage of fans in attendance who are not British, it was actually lower than 40%. I did a video on the Major League Baseball London series in 2019. And I looked at the facts and figures. It was a much higher percentage of British fans in attendance. I think it was around 25 to 30% were overseas residents or not British nationals. There is a very large US population over here anyway, not just in London but across the UK. There's a lot of Americans over here through work in the military installations and through government bodies. There are a lot of Americans in the UK. Um, but the crowd numbers that were British were actually higher than I thought they would be. Looking at the facts and figures that Major League Baseball released and what is publicly available. Now, what happens this year in 2023 when they come back with the Cardinals and the Cubs? And then going forward, will be interesting to see at the end of their agreement in 2026, um, before they decide to, look at renewing or ending their London series, because we don't know how long that's going to last. We will see what the percentage is. Uh, the NFL, I've gone off the NFL. Not because I, again, dislike American football. I actually prefer Canadian football over American football, but the style of play that is. I've gone off it because I think there is such a thing as market saturation. That may be one of the reasons why people are like, I can't afford to watch all this sport. Um, and I have tired of the international series. I haven't watched the Super Bowl for like 4 years, for example. So I've become a bit fatigued, I think. A friend of mine went to every single London game from inception in 2007 till I believe about 2018. And then he saw it, and then 2017. And it was around that time that he basically said, I can't afford to go. And my friend Ollie is a chartered accountant. He's a corporate accountant. So when we're talking about how does someone even pay 5 billion for a company, it's called corporate banking, asset transfer. So my mate Ollie's a corporate accountant for a rather large British supermarket chain, a rather large British company that's worth billions. Um, and he basically said to me, and bear in mind, he's on a very nice, very comfortable salary. He said, I can't afford to go anymore. So when you've got someone who is on a really decent salary, a white collar worker saying, I cannot justify paying to go see 2 or 3 games a year, how the hell are you supposed to? In theory, because the NFL has, in theory, it's not practice, but in theory, wants to have this London-based franchise, probably the Jacksonville Jaguars, which was the idea. How, in theory, can you expect um, a fan to go? Would I say 30 grand a year? Well, for a couple or singularly, because I'm on less than that and I'm not comfortable. I'm constantly in my overdraft. So double that, and I think even then, if that's a household splitting it, like you've got a young couple who are renting where I rent, yeah, that's comfortable. If you have got to pay a mortgage and you're a couple and you've got kids, you're scraping it a bit because 5 years ago, yes, now no. But my friend Ollie, he's on a double that, and he says I can't justify the spend to go to London with his friends every year to watch a handful of games. So if you think about it, the NFL originally wanted to have a team in London by now, many years ago. If you can't get my mate Ollie's a diehard NFL fan, diehard. Pittsburgh Steelers, the lot. He's a Steelers tragic, diehard. If you can't get a diehard fan to commit and say it's justifiable expense, how are you going to get the casual fans to turn up on a regular basis for 8 home games a season before playoffs? It's just this is why NFL Europe failed. The ticketing price is key. So I was looking earlier this morning at the Cornish rugby league team's season ticket price. Right now they're in League One. It's 59 quid a year. So they've made a just and the crowd numbers are pretty decent for the level they play at. Regularly sell out the Memorial Ground at Penryn. Right now they lost yesterday, but their season ticket price is very, very, very reasonable. They've worked out the area they are in, low incomes, very rural locations, so small villages and towns, wide catchment area where fans can be travelling for up to an hour to get to a game. Their season ticket, really, really reasonable. Cheaper than an ice hockey season ticket, which is stunning. And they're a professional outfit, they've got to pay the players. So I look at that and ticketing, price of tickets. This is something that I think Major League Baseball and their London series got dreadfully wrong in 2019 for the bands of ticket pricing. They didn't have enough cheap tickets and too many expensive tickets, so that put some people off, and that gave mixed reviews. But no, 30,000 a year, I think, is not comfortable. No. I'm lucky. If you are a couple and you're both earning 30 grand a year, this is before tax. I think you can get by renting a small one bed flat, which is what I do. If my girlfriend was still with me, she would actually be earning more money than me, and she is actually earning more money than my ex partner. I still talk to her. She earns more money than me by, I think it's not much, but when I get my pay rise, we'll debate. She's fully on in the private sector. I'm a subcontractor for the public sector, so my pay rises are significantly less. Um, but for me, I haven't been to an ice hockey match for before COVID, 4 years. Um, so yeah, I can't justify spending any money to go to games. I've been invited to go to games with friends, but I just say I can't justify it. I cannot justify it. I've got to save as many pennies as possible because my rent increases, and I'm not sure how much my wage increase, my pay rise is going to be. We've had some discussions with management. We're not sure. So until I have concrete figures that I can work on to sort of calculate, can't be certain on what the pay rise is going to be. And then I've got to factor in council tax and inflation. While it's peaked and it's starting to come down slowly, prices are still much higher than what they were when I first moved into my current apartment. So as I say, can't justify going. Well, I would love to go, can't afford it. Now, that's not to say if I lived closer, I wouldn't try and catch the occasional game. And this is what professional sport's got to realise. And this is what I think COVID exposed was the ticketing prices. When times are good, you can get away with it. But if you over exploit your fan base, you're going to have problems. And what I've discovered doing my football club histories, and even other rugby league and stuff like that, and other sports team histories, and looked at scandals within the game and looked at sport finances. COVID exposed so many bad practices that have been going on for not just a few years, decades, decades of dodginess financially. Where the question does have to be asked: where has all the money gone? Where has all this money gone? Um, have I had a chance? I haven't actually had a chance to look at the independent regulator yet. Um, but I'll have to look into it. I've got to look into a few other bits and pieces. There's a few other video ideas that I've got floating around. I want to look at the rise and the collapse of ITV Digital because that has come up in research for videos, and I want to have a look at the collapse of Setanta because that has also come up in video research, looking at when I decide what club I'm going to do next. So my last video was on Dunfermline. The one before that was on Dundee. So Scottish football's been massively impacted by Setanta's failure. Barnsley, when the research for that, ITV Digital's failure massively impacted them, led to an administration. So we're talking about clubs that have been in the top flight of their domestic league system, who won trophies historically, or been to cup finals, or things like that, where the TV money, the higher up the league system you go, is worth more. Barnsley were in administration 4 years after falling out of the Premier League. So they would still got the parachute payments, and that's because ITV Digital went bust, and the impact that had on what became the Championship in League One and League Two, the old Division One, Division Two, Division Three, right? Dunfermline, okay, it's not 100% linked to the collapse of Setanta, but even after the collapse of Setanta, their ownership was under John Yorkston and Gavin Marston, I've got it written down there, were fiddling the books to compensate for the loss of TV income. Obviously, Gretna went out of business and Rangers were liquidated and reformed. Livingston had problems as well. So those impacts are still being felt down the line many years later. The average American is not that much wealthier than the average Brit. Pretty. I think across the board, yes. So it depends where you are because the US is such a vast country with so many regional variations from state to state and even within state. Um, and house prices and inflation. Some states are really cheap to live in. And if you work remotely, you can earn really good money and actually be better off working remotely than continuing to live where you are. Whereas here, yes, there's regional variation in house prices and costs. So the further north you go, yes, it is cheaper. But the minimum wage is still the same. So the minimum wage, say in Lancashire, let's say we'll go for Penrith in Lancashire, or Cumbria, would get you further than the minimum wage here in Berkshire, right? So if you live in rural Lancashire or rural Cumbria, yes, the minimum wage will take you further. So if you are on a public sector job or you can work remotely and do what you're doing working remotely, yes, your salary will get you further, but your private sector bills like your phone bill, your internet, TV subscription will be the same. It's the goods and services that you buy at the supermarket, so food and drink costs you less, and your council tax will be less. But certain goods and services are the same price. But because other goods and services it costs you less. My views on Midlands Hurricanes. I do like seeing sports expand and try and grow like Cornwall. Purple kit though. Ooh, what are they trying to be? The Melbourne Storm. I'll have to look into the Midlands Hurricanes and go from there. BT Sport will be renamed as TNT Sports following a merger with Warner Brothers Discovery. Well, Warner Brothers Discovery are trying to get out of the sports market in the US. So AT&T Comcast is going to disappear in a month. So I find that interesting that a struggling broadcaster across the Atlantic is buying into a struggling broadcaster over here. BT Sport is crap. It is. I've always stated it's crap. Now, whether that means the Champions League final and the Europa League final and the Europa Conference League final get taken off YouTube, which is the only way I can access, that's going to be interesting because that was part of the agreement to allow them to get exclusive rights to the European UEFA competitions, club competitions. Now, does that mean that we might get the Champions League, Europa League, and Europa Conference League back on free-to-air TV? I bloody hope so. TNT though is actually Ted Turner, so that sounds to me as if Ted Turner's bought a chunk of Warner Brothers Discovery, who are going out of business. Not going out of business, but Warner Brothers Discovery getting out of the sports game. So whether they've sold their sports arm to TNT, and so there's different naming rights, but I think Eurosport has struggled in certain years, but they have got their online. So Eurosport have adapted quicker to the change, I think, in consumer habits. But there's a lot going on with broadcast rights right now, and companies facing bankruptcy or trying to get out of certain sectors of the broadcast industry, so be it film or entertainment, streaming. We're seeing changes in viewing habits, and BT Sport has been hemorrhaging money for years, long before COVID. It's barely been profitable, but the BT Group itself is, and they're the parent company. So maybe BT is trying to shed itself of a money loser by selling a proportion of it and merging it with, uh, you know, try and get the flaming bag of dog shit off their books. Because in my opinion, what we saw during COVID and the TV companies, we could have another ITV Digital or Setanta on our hands, and if BT keep hemorrhaging money out of BT Sport, which is what ITV Digital did to ITV. They're on the stock exchange. They shareholders will get pissed basically because the value of their shares will weaken. And at a time like this, where you've got stocks and shares, they're worth looking at as potential money earners. You bought so, and I will look at. And I think this is important. But then again, what happens to Eurosport? What actually happens to Eurosport? Because Eurosport has had its own struggles throughout its history. I grew up watching Eurosport. I don't watch it as much now. They've had their struggles. Premier Sports, Free Sports, you know, they're trying to get into that gap where Setanta was. And I don't think they're growing as fast as they would like. I think COVID has impacted that. Um, and Viaplay, look, they're obviously on TV and online as well. I think a diversification might be a good thing, but is it? Because BT Sport have been accused of that Champions League monopoly. However, because there is so much football on the TV, it's not classed as a monopoly. That makes sense. Fans are pissed off, but it is what it is. But I think the writing was on the wall in the FA Cup. They didn't renew the rights to the FA Cup, and that's a big domestic audience that they've just lost there. I just want to see if Premier Sports is actually still going or if it's become Viaplay, because I felt Premier Sports and Free Sports was a good minor player in the TV broadcasting sports market. Um, let's have a look. No, Premier Sports is still going. Uh, so Premier Sports is Free Sports is still going as well. Viaplay is obviously a thing. Uh, what else have we got? Yeah, so Viaplay is actually owned by Premier Sports. So there you go. So Viaplay is the owner of Premier Sports. So they've expanded. So yes, I was double checking to see if Premier Sports was still going. So Premier Sports is owned by Viaplay, basically. So they've strengthened their arm over the last couple of years. Um, um, BT Sport and Eurosport have more channels than TNT Sport will have. Well, there's the slots. So you've got X amount of channel slots on the bandwidth that is allowed under the licensing agreement, like the BBC TV license and all that, because the BBC are actually the corporation that grants operating licenses. I think you'll find there's ways of doing it. There's things in the way, but BBC, you pay the license fee, which people are grumbling about, but the BBC also grants the operating licenses for other channels such as ITV, Channel 5, who are not are all private. Channel 4's mix of public and private. Yeah, Viaplay is Premier Sports, just a different name. Um, so there's so many slots on the bandwidth, basically. So they have their operating licenses. So Eurosport, I think, has got like 2 or 3 channels. Viaplay / Premier Sports has Premier Sports 1 and 2 and Free Sports, which were what they were before. So that has 3 channels again on their slot on their license. TNT, I don't know what many channels have disappeared off the sports section. Many channels. And Sky Sports has restructured, obviously, in recent years since Comcast came in and changed their structure after 2021 with their restructuring. Um, but the BBC are the one who grant the operating license. So whether that means BT Sport is gone, which I think a lot of looking at the cost of Viaplay, it's a hell of a lot cheaper than BT Sport. People are going to look, because I look at the rights that Viaplay have. Okay, it may not be all the top games, but they've got a fair mix of games, and they're allowing you to also do it online as well, rather than just having. Because I don't watch TV anymore, so I think Viaplay is going to start eroding Sky Sports. It's going to start eroding its opposition. People want cheaper alternatives that are more accessible. That's basically what we've seen and what's going on in the US and what's happened. Yeah, Virgin Media. I think Virgin Media's had a lot of problems with various other channels. Virgin Media is I remember there were certain when Virgin Media took over NTL Telewest, basically what it was. All those years ago, there were certain channels that existed for a while that don't exist anymore, like Bravo. Remember Bravo? I do. The Payne Hour, that was fucking grim, but funny. So NTL Telewest is now Virgin Media. Virgin Media have been criticised for some of there's things like code shares and agreements, and they felt that Sky, Eurosport, and other sports channels weren't paying them. There's paying, allowing them to use their platform. Sky and Virgin have been in a battle for years. BT, Sky, and Virgin will hate it because Virgin or Sky and BT will supply internet as well, and that became a bit of a sticking point on a commercial contract aspect. So yes, there are a lot of consumers who've lost out because they're Virgin customers. The issue of like channel blackouts and commercial agreements is not just a British problem. It impacts over in the US where they've got regional cable networks and the nationwide network. So if you live in Colorado and you've got altitude, depending on what carrier provider you have, you may or may not be able to watch Colorado Avalanche games or the Denver Nuggets play, and that's really frustrating for Major League fans in the US. But yeah, Viaplay is basically Premier Sports, so there's obviously the Premier Sports brand is changed in the UK. Now, I was looking for Premier Sports the other day and I couldn't find it, and I found out now it's owned by Viaplay. So I thought, oh Christ, I hope my favourite sports broadcaster in the UK hasn't gone bust. It hasn't. It's just the group has expanded. They've restructured their company, and they are a cheaper alternative than their rivals. And BT Sport has been hemorrhaging money for a very, very long time. And they were obviously BT and Sky were massively criticised for demanding rebates. Now, I believe Viaplay, Premier Sports, didn't demand rebates following the suspension of sporting operations in 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Christ, it's been that long. 3 years ago, when the first COVID lockdown comes in, the Premier Sports Group, which is now Viaplay, were one of the few broadcasters that didn't demand payment rebate from the leagues that it broadcasts. Where Sky and BT very publicly demanded, well, we need to be recompensated and reimbursed for basically breach of contract. Basically, the government could have brought in the defence of the reactivate the Defence of the Realm Act, basically, rather than bringing in, which is basically okay, there'll be a suspension of certain rights and privileges for citizens and certain aspects of during the pandemic. Because the Defence of the Realm Act is still actually on the statute book, and certain bits of it have been amended or superseded, but it could be reactivated, basically. Yes, ITV Digital. So I found out obviously about the Barnsley situation. I did obviously look at Bradford City's club history last summer. So I will look into the collapse of ITV Digital because I think it is vital in the current conversation we are having today in regards to AT&T Comcast, which is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, and the fact that they're wanting to go, we want to get regional sports off our books in the US, but they're happy to buy a sports broadcaster or buy into or merge with a sports broadcaster in the UK, which I find really, really interesting. Considering that Disney didn't want the Fox Sports affiliates when they took over the Fox network in the US, which becomes Bally Sports, which is now bankrupt. But yeah, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, the collapse of ITV Digital was felt quite badly at the time. Now I've got to look into the 12 clubs in total. It will be interesting to say, well, how many other clubs were also impacted later on down the line because Setanta goes bust, right? But yeah, I'll look into ITV Digital and why it failed. It will be a lengthy video. It won't just be a couple of minutes. We'll have to break it down. Foundation, premise of it, structure, why it failed, impacts it had, leading on to Setanta. Following on from that, Setanta goes bust 6 years later, 7 years later. Following on from that, BT Sport comes along, loses money, is disappearing off our screens. Premier Sports comes along, changes name, still going, different name. Sky Sports restructures, sold on. So we're looking at the cost of being a fan, and I think market saturation and also economics has played a part, and changing preferences. Like, I have not watched live sport on the TV properly for a while. I think 2 years actually. I watched a couple of the men's Euros games with my next door neighbour uh, a couple of years ago, and I watched the World part of the World Cup final. Though I watched the World Cup final upstairs with my neighbour because my laptop was getting fixed. But apart from that, I've only watched what 3 football matches on TV in best part of 3 years. So it's it's a difficult one. Can I see Klopp leaving if Liverpool don't get top four? We'll have to see what goes on with Liverpool because there's that rumor circulating that FSG might want to sell Liverpool Football Club. What is very interesting with FSG is the Pittsburgh Penguins. Their recent acquisition in the NHL aren't doing very well this season either. They've had a decline, so there's a lot of pressure on the ownership in regards to some of the decisions they've taken. Um, you know what funds are available, some of the players they've let go, some of the off, non-playing groups, so the support staff, like coaches and directors of sporting directors, people they've hired and fired at not only Liverpool but also Pittsburgh Penguins. They spent a lot of money acquiring the Pittsburgh Penguins with the FSG group, which I think has impacted what Liverpool can buy and spend and invest in the playing squad and the non-playing infrastructure at Liverpool. So we'll see what happens. Do I think Paramount, Peacock, and Discovery, etc., Netflix will buy into sports broadcasting? Well, Netflix has done a lot of sports documentaries, the fly on the wall documentaries and stuff over the years. Um, Obviously, we've just had the Rex Welcome to Wrexham documentary. So we'll see what happens. I think Amazon have obviously shown the way with their Amazon Prime getting some of the football rights. They're not rugby and rugby union rights. They're not the best games in the world. They're the ones that people watch the least anyway. Um, but looking at how some of these streaming services are starting to adjust their business models and change their terms of service, and how people are like again cancelling or reducing what they consume with streaming services. We'll see, but a lot of people have criticised um, blackouts, so you can see where the illegal streaming has come from. So look, if some of these streaming companies are smart, and I look at how some leagues actually do promote themselves internationally quite well, and I will say the NRL and the AFL do quite a good job with their websites and how they promote themselves to a global audience. And they're obviously making money, otherwise they'll shut down the NRL.com and the AFL.com website for the Fox. They're obviously making money on that media arm with how much they're charging on a global scale outside the blackout areas of Oceania, which is New Zealand and Australia and the Pacific Islands. It's going to be interesting. The rise of VPNs, the rise of illegal streaming or illegal chipped boxes. The streaming companies, I think, need to look at how they're pricing things. Raising your prices and changing your terms of service by blocking password sharing, bringing ads onto the platform now, which they always promised would never happen. It's basically like subscription TV. Where we were told that eventually we'll make enough money that we don't need advertising, so you'll be free of ads, and that hasn't been the case. You're actually bombarded with adverts. But I think if certain broadcasters are smart or certain leagues are smart, they will use things like YouTube to live stream content rather than battle with a brick and mortar, shall I call it, traditional broadcast partner. I think if leagues like the NHL and the NRL, well, the NRL are pretty smart. I think they repost the games a day after they've been played on their YouTube channel. But I think if certain leagues are smarter with how they do things and they don't geo block, like the World Championship Ice Hockey, I can't watch the Great Britain games, but I can watch every other nation compete live because where I am is geo blocked, which I always find frustrating because I don't unless I actually pay for Viaplay. Can't watch it. Now I'm tempted to do that. Now I think the fact that BT Sport is basically being bought out tells all you need to know about BT going, okay, our TV experiment hasn't worked. Hasn't worked. Um, uh, but Sky, BT, and what was Premier Sports, which is now Viaplay, they've been the three companies that have dominated the British sports market now for the best part of a decade. Let's be honest. Sky have been there for a long time. But BT and Premier have come in following the collapse of Setanta and ITV Digital. Now, Viaplay is obviously making money, otherwise they wouldn't have come up with the new rebranding. Rather than just having Premier Sports and Free Sports, they've got several channels now under their umbrella, plus a website. They're obviously making money. They've grown quite well. They've grown within their means. They haven't overextended themselves, but they've slowly built up their portfolio. BT, on the other hand, have spent a lot of money investing in their TV arm, their BT Sports channels, and what was ESPN on the ESPN bandwidth, following the collapse of Setanta and ITV Digital, and following the issues with Virgin with NTL Teleworth. And BT have hemorrhaged money because of poor, really, really poor broadcasting choices of lineup, of presenters, of production values. What we've seen, obviously, with rugby union, with the club game having massive money problems, is partly down to BT. Ironically, the fact they're starting to lose, they've been shedding rights that they battled really hard to get hold of. I would think that the Champions League or the UEFA club competitions will eventually come off and become back to free to air shared coverage because should this Discovery sort of takeover fail because they're trying to get out of the sports market in the US, I can't see them long term staying in the sports market in Europe because they've found they're hemorrhaging money in the US, which is why in a month's time they cease broadcasting rights, which is going to impact the NHL massively because in recent years, the two new expansion teams in the NHL, Vegas and Seattle, their broadcast partner for regional broadcasts is AT&T Comcast. Now, the Penguins also, their regional broadcast is AT&T Comcast, right? Suddenly, we're finding out that Bally Sports going tits up, facing bankruptcy, and AT&T Comcast is going to cease being a sports broadcaster in 4 weeks. So the situation has evolved very, very quickly since the start of the season in the NHL, for example. So since last autumn, the situation has evolved rapidly. And whether, that has a knock-on impact on ESPN and TNT, because TNT have just got back in with the Ted Turner Network into major leagues. They've got some of the minor leagues like Major League Rugby, but they've got back into Ted Turner, back into Major League Sports Broadcasting. Now, NBCSN, for whatever reason, weren't given an extension on the nationwide US rights. They've only got 4, I think, is it 5 teams under their NBCSN broadcast banner. MSG Network, well run. So they've got the New York state-based teams in the NBA, the NHL, Major League Baseball. They do really well, the Major League Sports Network. So as a regional broadcaster, they're good. NBC, they're good. Rugby union's in financial difficulty. What they don't need is a collapse of their major broadcast partner. That's what they don't need. That's what I fear could happen. Premier Sports picks up some of the, or Viaplay Premier Sports pick up some of the club rugby union, but if BT Sport goes belly up, if this merger takeover continues to hemorrhage money, then we could see further issues in regards to rugby union and the club game and the international game in Europe, well, globally, facing hemorrhaging money. Now, I don't know what the viewership is like on Amazon and what the pickup has been on Amazon Prime, but that move was criticised at the time it was signed, but people criticise some of these decisions, and then they just go, "Oh, I'm not interested in watching the sport anyway, or watching on the broad." So you can't win. But I've looked at the quality of broadcasting. Obviously, this week, the late great John Watson, OBE, former football commentator, obviously passed away. And you look at his quality of commentary and his quality of being part of a broadcast team. He was fantastic, fantastic. You look at the quality of some of the. I mean, I'll be watching the France Scotland game at 3 o'clock, the Six Nations. So a little over 2 hours time. The quality of the broadcasting in that is so subpar to what it was 20 years ago. It's unreal. Now, I grew up listening to John Watson. I grew up. I mean, Jonathan Pearce. Okay, he's faced some criticism in recent years, um, but I grew up listening to Jonathan Pearce on the old Channel 5 broadcast rights in for European football. Um, so the I don't know. I think that the drop in quality in sports broadcasting across the board, doesn't matter what the broadcaster is, be it an independent website that, like a Viaplay or something that comes along and picks up a domestic league, starts getting a bit of traction, picks up various things, to the individual leagues themselves using streaming platforms, or the individual teams using streaming platforms, which I've seen, which is a good way to make that individual team money, all the way up to the bigger broadcasters. In recent years, I would say in the last 5, 6, 7 years, it has been dreadful. It has been a shower of shit. Best way to describe it, shower of shit. And I try and avoid swearing as much as possible, but I have noticed a massive drop off in the quality of sports broadcasting. And I think it's about the time of Setanta going bust that the decline really started to accelerate, because some very good broadcasters were out of a job. Some very good researchers and support staff and all the sound techie guys. A lot of people involved in the broadcast industry were suddenly out of a job. And the decline's been happening for some time, but it's accelerated in recent years. And you can see why sports fans are like, ugh, I'd rather mute the commentary, or have that button to change the commentary, or illegally stream. Um, what should a new viewer in rugby look out for when watching rugby to enjoy the game? Are we talking rugby union or rugby league? Because rugby union, there's a lot of rule changes coming and being introduced. Rugby league, they brought in a lot of rule changes because of COVID, so the game has picked up in pace. I would say the best way for a new viewer is just to, I would say, start off watching rugby league because it's a simpler form of the game. It's a much simpler form of the game. And then when you get a bit more comfortable understanding the basics, rugby union is a good way to switch over, or watch both. But I would say watch a few games first of both codes, and 5 or 6 games. Rugby league, I would say start with rugby league over rugby union. If you're a new viewer and you're trying to understand the game first up. Also, you've got less players on the field, so it's actually a little bit less confusing. But the basic principles of you pass the ball backwards, kick the ball forwards, got to be behind the kicker when the kick is kicked, can't force the ball forward with your hand, that kind of thing. The basic, simple rules of tackle, high, kick, pass are the same. It's the tackle area that is slightly different. The ruck, and there's no maul in rugby league, for example, but the tackle area in league is different to union. The number of players on the field is different in league to union. Scrums are different. There's no line-outs in league. Basically, league is a stripped-down version of union, is the best way to describe it. But they are fundamentally different, but they have the same basic fundamental skill set. So a creative halfback will have the same similar skill set that a scrum half or a fly half would have in the creative axis. The fullback has a very similar role. So there is that basic spine of the team is very, very similar. So your creative axis, fullback, the halves. I mean, the dummy half slash hooker. Obviously, they have a different role. But basically, your scrum half style player to your halfbacks, who will basically be your 10, 12, basically. through to your fullback, that the creative spine is actually, ironically, very similar to rugby union. Now, with the basic skill set, the advanced skill set is different. The basic skill set is the same. Your outside backs, ironically, are very, very similar. Just the centres, just have you're a centre, left centre, right centre, rather than inside and outside. But basic principle: centre supports the winger and vice versa. The fullback will come into the line in an attacking move. Rugby union, much more complex, more players on the pitch. The set plays are more contested, such as line out and scrum. Although you can actually technically have contested scrums in league, very rarely happens. But when another team pushes you off the ball, doesn't happen often. It's normally a surprise play that a team is, but rarely happens. Um, So the scrums are fully contested. The line out's fully contested. Again, basic principles are the same. It's the tackle area. There's mauls, rolling mauls are different. But yeah, I would say depending on if you know people who play one of the codes, it helps. If you don't, I would say rugby league is a simpler game to watch. It's a simpler game to understand. Once you've watched 5 or 6, a handful of games, you pick it up quicker. Rugby union, I've done videos discussing each individual position in rugby union, and that was a long time ago. I need to read, rugby union for beginners, rugby league for beginners. Um, it's a more complex sport because the forwards and the backs actually do multiple skills. It's more complicated, which I think impacts the potential growth of the sport. That makes sense. I think rugby league somehow shoots itself in the foot because rugby league should be a global sport. Rugby union should be that middle class sport that doesn't. It's not professional, but it's professional. Rugby league should be more popular than it actually is. But it's the governance side of the game that's holding league back, and it's the finances of the game that's holding union back. There you go. That's the best way to describe it. Some of the football commentators on Sky BT are really shocking. Agreed. People like Martin Tyler and Peter Drury are the exceptions. Yes, they are. I think Sky and BT have been dreadful since inception. Austin Healey on the rugby union coverage, I'd rather shoot myself in the foot with a crossbow, so I'm pinned to the floor whilst being attacked by a rabid pack of hyenas who are on crack than listen to Austin Healey, because Austin Healey was not a popular player. He's not a popular pundit or commentator. Am I going to watch No, I'm not watching the Chelsea Tottenham game. I'll be watching the France Scotland Six Nations clash in Paris, and then I'll be doing another live stream this evening, which will be a general hangout, and we'll just have a bit more relaxed discussion about things. Plus, it gives me time to look into what's actually happening with BT Sport. Give me time to look into what's going on with AT&T, Comcast, and if any decisions have actually been taken over in the US and Canada and over here. TNT, I would raise an eyebrow at that because viewership figures in the US have fallen back. ESPN's withdrawn from the European market. So basically, global broadcasters are finding, just globally, not just globally, they're finding that people are, as we say, cutting the cord. They're cutting the cable. They're not willing to traditionally watch TV in the way they used to. And some of them are not adapting quick enough to the change in viewing habits. So I do think websites like Viaplay, the way the NRL and the AFL with their links to the Fox network are doing this, are going the right way with the streaming services. And where you pay a monthly, weekly, or yearly subscription, whatever you want to pay as a subscription. I pay yearly for mine, which works out cheaper than monthly. As a one-off payment. I think broadcasters need to be more flexible. They need to get rid of the broadcasting blackouts because traditional media wants to protect itself. However, fans, the consumers, are saying, well, this is sort of monopolizing the economics of it all, which is against competition, that kind of thing. And there are some fair question marks over that. So we'll see what happens. Chelsea Tottenham, I think that could be a 0-0 draw. I really do. I think Tottenham are obviously better than Chelsea right now, but they underachieved. Chelsea are a mess. Whether Todd Bowley keeps faith with Graham Potter or Graham Potter's gone, there's been a lot of upheaval behind the scenes at Chelsea over a significant period of time. Tottenham, there's rumours that Tottenham might be sold. So there's several Premier League clubs that are potentially up for sale. We know Manchester United, there are advanced discussions that potentially could take place. The Glazers may or may not decide to finally sell up or sell a stake. So there's things that are quite interesting going on. Now I'm going to check what Viaplay's ownership is, because I believe Premier Sports was actually British, but we'll see what actually comes up. Let's have a look. Premier Sports. One streaming service, unlimited entertainment. Stream the latest hit series of movies, classic films, live sports. Enter the email address you use for the rest of the Premier Sports below. Wow. Premier Player. Viaplay Sports, here we go. So let's have a look at Viaplay quickly. Viaplay Sports and Premier Sports are a group of paid television sports channels owned by Viaplay Group. English language, Viaplay Sports, Premier Sports, UK Republic of, I think they to La Liga, Scottish League Cup, Elite Ice Hockey League, NHL and NASCAR. Viaplay Sports has shared rights to the United Rugby Championship in the UK, 53 Premier League games in Ireland, and Scottish Cup rights for BBC Scotland. Availability. So Viaplay's always owned Premier Sports, actually. Yeah, Premier Sports was not available on Virgin Media. Subsidiary channels. Free Sports was launched on the end of August 2017. Well, they've got coverage, previous coverages. Coverage, Pro League, football, Gaelic, ice hockey. 15 NHL games a week on Viaplay for the NHL, it says here. Motorsport, Rugby Union, Rugby League. Pro wrestling, previous coverage, bowls, boxing, darts, football, greyhound handball, mixed martial arts, motorsport, rugby league, rugby union. So let's have a look at Viaplay. Let's see if Viaplay Group. Yeah, they are Swedish. They were founded 4 years ago. Streaming service, Viasat on demand, Aeroserve, Nordic Baltic, United States, mystery launch. Wow, Viaplay's only been going since November the 1st. So that's in the UK. They're planning to go to Canada. They are available. That's interesting. And they July last year they acquired Premier Sports. So there we go. And they rebranded it. That's why I couldn't find it. Let's have a look at Viaplay.com. Film series, Viaplay Trial Monthly, Viaplay Total Annual. You can't get the sports on the free trial, though. That's really annoying. but you can catch films and oh wow. Well, what do we get? You get the European qualifiers, UEFA Nations League, good La Liga, the Coppa Italia, Scottish Cup, Championship, the French Top 14, the NHL, the Elite League, NASCAR, the Rugby Champions Cup. There's quite a bit there. And you do get channels if you're current. So that's actually not bad. It's just a bit pricey though. 14.99 a month, and you get all the Nordic programs. So you get like what's the there's a lot of bugger. It's all those Nordic crime series, which are brilliant. The annual one is actually cheaper than the monthly one, which is kind of interesting. But you get the Euro 2024 qualifiers, La Liga, Scottish Cup football, and United Rugby Championship. I am tempted. I am fucking tempted. So if you're in it, streaming service devices, Chromecast, Apple TV, Android, Amazon Fire, TV, computer, PC or Mac, mobile tab. Yeah, I could bring that special. Live Playoffs is live sports series, movies, and documentaries. You can sign up via our partners or directly by Ooh. Yeah, so actually, I might get that after my pay rise. I might get that after my pay rise so I can watch the NHL playoffs. That's going to be fantastic. So, yeah, I can see things like Viaplay being the way forward for sports broadcasting. Now, enough with me babbling on about TV rights and me looking on my phone. Looking at the price of that, though, it's more expensive for me to do that than get the NRL content that I pay for. So I'll have to make a decision come playoff time about that. But ice hockey and elite league so the NHL and the elite league, two of my favourite leagues, I actually get to watch, and it's reasonably priced. It's cheaper, a lot cheaper than Sky, a lot cheaper than Sky. Who do I think will win the promotion playoff spots in the channel? I'm a Blackburn fan, so obviously I want Blackburn to make the playoffs. We've been second this season. We've been top this season. We've been third. We're now fourth. We were as low as like eighth. Borough, they're third. I think the top two are unless Sheffield United really fall off a cliff. I can't see us and Borough catching Sheffield United. But we've had a recent change in form, so maybe if we can continue winning and Sheffield United, us and Sheffield United are both still in the FA Cup, so that's an interesting subplot. Burnley have run away with it. So unless Burnley decide to just really let their foot off the pedal and do a bit of squad rotation and take things easy, I can't see them being caught by anyone. Sheffield United, again, they have to keep the foot on the pedal, win more than they draw more than they lose, keep getting points, not dropping too many points. It's going to be a scramble. The fact that Millwall and Luton are sniffing around is mental, but the league is so congested this season, so tight that as a Blackburn fan, as I found out, we went from a few points behind you, Sheffield United and Burnley to eighth. We dropped a lot of points over the Christmas New Year period, and we had a run of 6 or 7 bad games. That was enough to drop us 5, 6 places, and take us out the actual automatic places and out of that automatic promotion hunt. So a couple of bad weeks and you're out of it. A couple of good weeks or a good little run of form and you're in it. So it's a very congested league this year, more competitive than I think I've ever seen. So I think Burnley are going to be champions. Sheffield United most likely are going to be second, but they could have a drop off in form. You just don't know. They could have a wobble, drop some points. They're only 9 points above us. If we win 3 in a row and they lose 3 in a row, the situation is completely different. Completely different. And if Borough have a few more wobbles, the situation changes again. So, in regards to right now, I think we're a little bit too far out. I think come the end of March, I think we'll have a better idea. There might be some separation of some teams. I think we're a little bit too soon at the moment to really go. Yeah, these are the clubs that are going to be in there come the end. Um, the fact that Luton and Millwall are sniffing around. I mean, Luton were in the playoff hunt last year as well, so that's not unusual for Luton to be there. But Millwall, that could be interesting. If they go on they can win those clutch games. We've seen them go on cup runs before. So if they were to make the playoff final, they're that type of team where they have gone on runs before and they have won those big games in like clutch games. So they're an outside bet. Luton, I think, will be frustrated with how last season ended. Even with Norwich and Vanguard kicking off, I'm still concerned that we won't make playoffs if we don't go up this season. I'm worried it'll be difficult if big clubs like have to come down. Look, Norwich are a big club. People forget that actually in the 80s and 90s they were one of the top sides in the country, and I think if there hadn't been the European ban on English clubs, things would have been a very different story for Norwich long term. I think they're a well-run club financially. Um, the problem with clubs like Norwich is they become a yo-yo club. That's the problem. They haven't been able to sustain themselves in the Premier League on a long-term basis in the modern era. They've had multiple spells in the top flight, but haven't been able to sustain it for more than a couple of seasons. So the problem with clubs like Norwich is they become yo-yo clubs, and that's where the parachute payment system and the structures, financial structures, and salary caps and wage caps and spending caps again get raised regularly. And then you look at the history of the English league system. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's only 40 or 50 clubs have ever been in the top flight ever since the foundation of the football league, and then the two-tier, first division, second division, and then multiple division structure. It's less than a third of clubs, I think, that have historically competed in the football league have ever been in the top flight. So that competitive nature, where all the clubs basically get a go. There are some clubs that have never been in the top flight that have always been in the football league, like your Port Vales, for example, who've never been in the top flight. Your Grim or your Grim. Have Grims been in top? I'm gonna have to look at my notes now and look at my club histories. But some clubs have been in the football league pretty much the entirety of their existence. Have never been in the top flight. Barnsley, for example, pretty much second division side. They've had one season in the top flight, but they've had the most seasons in the second tier, for example. Other clubs have flirted with being yo-yo clubs, like Peterborough. They can't establish themselves in one league or another. They yo-yo. Clubs like Carlisle have gone up and gone down. So it is a very, very interesting talking point when it comes to looking at what clubs do well and what clubs don't do well. Like Watford, for example, have had really they've come close to winning silverware and haven't quite done it. And they're a bit of what I call a joke club with how they're run. But when you buy Chelsea off Wish, true. The thing is, and I've been following professional sports since like the age of 2-3 years old, and I've been following it quite religiously. Obviously, before the channel was set up, but for some time, you do get those clubs that are yo-yo clubs who can't establish themselves in one league or another. They're too good for the league below, but they're not good enough for the league above. And Norwich come into that bracket on a consistent basis. West Brom used to have that moniker against them. Peterborough United of the lower divisions are a yo-yo club. They're too good for League One, not good enough for the Championship. And you get this discussion about the yo-yo club dynamic, and the part of the problem is the parachute payment system, and how yes, relegation isn't the ultimate punishment for failure, but then when you reward that failure with, we'll cushion the blow a little bit, we'll cushion the blow because of the way the financial structures of football work now. Yeah, look, Southend United, I've got to do a video on them before they go out of business. Chronic mismanagement, another administration. But look, when COVID first hit, we were told a minimum of 16 clubs will go out of business. Minimum of 16. One club has gone out of business because of COVID. One club went out of business just before COVID. So we were told the fearmongers, the negative, all the naysayers, all the clubs are like, oh, we need a salary cap, we need this. Every club's basically going to be buggered. 16 to 20 clubs will be out of business. X amount of clubs can't pay their players. Now, Southend is one of those clubs that the Doom Brigade were talking about, and their struggles have been quite public. But they're not the only club that's had money issues over a long period of time, and it doesn't matter what level pyramid you're in, because I could famously look at what's happened with Portsmouth, who were a Premier League club in administration, and yes, we can look at Bradford City and Charlton Athletic, and Sheffield Wednesday, Leeds United, Blackburn have had their struggles in recent time. We can look at a lot of clubs that have been at the top, fallen down the football pyramid, nearly gone out of business, and then slowly, however long it takes, battled their way back up the football pyramid. There's loads of clubs. Not and there's some very key examples, such as a Leeds or a Bradford, who've been at the top and gone out the bottom. Yeah, Dover Athletic. I mean, I watched a documentary about the non-league and how the grants and loans were divvied up. And Dover actually, their chairman made a fair penny out of that. But there's question marks about Dover Athletic. A lot of question marks about the running of that football club. When I did the video on Boston United and how they fiddled the system and got caught. So when people go, "Oh, Man City, this is a targeted campaign," it's not. Other clubs have been caught and punished by the Football League, the FA, the Premier League, UEFA. Boston United is an example I use. Yeah, small fry in comparison. They were fiddling the books as well. They got caught. They basically almost went out of business. The people involved went to prison for fraud, including the manager. The manager was in on it. So, and they've never fully recovered. So, what I find interesting is more and more clubs are struggling financially now than they were before the satellite TV, Sky Sports comes before 92. The struggles that clubs were finding financially were there pre 92, and the way that the relationship between the Football League, the FA, and the clubs was clearly a very toxic relationship. It wasn't working very well. There was not a lot of good faith between all parties. That the infrastructure was struggling. We've obviously just had Hillsborough and Hazel, the European ban on English clubs. The quality of stadiums weren't great. Attendances weren't doing as well across the board. But the financial structures of the game since 92 are broken because the way the TV deal is divvied up is not right. You could argue we have too many professional clubs. Or the fact that we may now have market saturation with how the cup competitions and the leagues are structured. There's a finite amount of money in the game at all levels with local and regional sponsors. And this is where the sponsorship deals with the global brands, the big companies that were mega bucks coming on. And yes, we could argue about the overseas ownership and should we look at ownership rules and more fan involvement like they have in Germany as a viable ownership model. We could definitely discuss that. But there are certain clubs we can look at absolutely, and how they've been run. And when I do the club histories, when I was really surprised with ITV Digital. I knew the impacts were severe. I didn't realise how many clubs were forced into administration within a short period of time. I mean, Barnsley were pretty much straight away. Now, it is a difficult one because obviously professional sport is a business. But in my mind, certain sports should just be automatically profitable. How they You have to then ask the question, where has all the money gone? Because you look at the value of some of these commercial agreements with sponsorships and TV deals and ticket prices, merchandise sales, the global brand. You have to then ask the question, has all the money gone? And why are so many clubs doing a Southend at the moment, doing Oldham Athletic? Where has all this money gone? And and that's not just COVID withstanding, and COVID has definitely sped up the money bubble struggling, because we have to seriously ask the question about, where's the money gone? Like, not only are clubs like your little fries, like your Southend United, your Berries, your Macclesfields, your Chesters, Rushton and Diamonds. We're going with the smaller region like your Gretnas. And then you look at Europe with like the situation at Parma and Palermo, big name Italian clubs that have had their money issues. And then we look at the giant clubs of European football, like your Real Madrids and your Barcelonas, and the amount of debt they have. And this is where the serious question is where there's a lack of transparency. Clearly, the books are being fiddled on an industrial scale, which is almost criminal, which has to be criminal. Has to be. Look at Juventus fiddling the books because they have money. Like, how? They have one of the biggest global companies backing them. They should not be bankrupt. They should not be fiddling the books. They don't need to fiddle the books. I know Italy's pretty corrupt, but they don't need to fiddle the books. When you've got Fiat, the Fiat family, basically, the Agnelli backing you as your chairman, as the money people, you should not be bankrupt. When you have the Spanish royal family backing like Real Madrid, you should not be bankrupt with the assets they have. So you have to ask the question of the transparency of the finances of the sport. And then you have to ask the question, okay, why are you fiddling the books then? There should be no need for the global brand that Barcelona, Real Madrid, Juventus, some of these other big name clubs across Europe. You have to ask the question, where's the money gone? And this shouldn't just be fans asking, but the authorities in charge, the actual government, not just the leagues, not just the players' associations, the players' unions, the actual like departments of finance and government should be going, hang on a second. If this was a car company, if this was a steel company, right? If this was a transport, if this was a private firm or a firm on the stock exchange, which some clubs have been in the past, if this was a any other industry other than sport, there would be investigations. There would be, you know, um, major questions asked about how a company could be over $1 billion in debt when they've been reporting profits for decades. Where's this money gone? There clearly has been some creative accounting. Because when you're asking employees, doesn't matter if they're football players, when you're asking employees um, to basically say, right, we've given you, we've signed your working contract, you're getting paid this much over a 5-year period with bonuses. By the way, we've now broken your contract. We're now asking you to take immediate pay cuts, or you don't get paid, or we won't TP your contract over to another employer, even though it has been agreed and your legal representatives have agreed. If you are basically, they're not paying, they're not paying. They can't register contracts. So if you were told, here's the regulations you have to abide by, and then you regularly breach them and get caught out, it reminds me of the, the Barcelona, the Real Madrid, the Juventus, the European Super League debacle. But some of those clubs involved in it, some of the financial mismanagement reminds me of the Enron scandal of 2001. It reminds me of some of the Ponzi scheme, like what's the cryptocurrency thing that's just gone bust in America, where the federal prosecutors are involved and there's fraud and allegations and wiretapping. And this reminds me of a Ponzi scheme. And you know, to me, I questions do have to be asked. And now we're seeing the collapse of broadcast partners. And I do honestly believe COVID has sped up um, the economic crisis that professional sports broadcasting is facing. Now, how like what the future holds about broadcast arrangements and structures and accessibility to the product, one thing, but financial transparency is woefully inadequate in so many sports, not just football. You could argue that about rugby union, rugby league, Major League Baseball. I mean, just look at that. I've discussed Major League Baseball before and its struggles, and the perception is when especially in North America when there's issues, that players agree, and actually the Major League Baseball players, if you look at their demands, very similar to the rugby union players in Wales, very similar to the NRL players in Australia. It's not it's not that the top end talent aren't getting paid enough. It's the league minimum salary. It's the protections for players because their playing careers can be cruelly cut short by injury and post playing training and assistance with finding new careers if they don't want to stay within the sport. Medical provisions, retirement provisions, and the media partners who are risk losing a lot of money when games aren't being played or there's strike action. They portray the players as greedy, as the bad guys. And in reality, it's the owners who are the bad guys. And they know enough redneck sports fans will, do a thing. Oh, my mental health video. Look, lately I will admit, I have been struggling. Now, whether that's to do with purely work, obviously the concerns I have about rising bills. I just felt that that was a good moment to raise the issue because I've raised the issue in the past and people just aren't interested. Now, I want as many of you to share that video. I want as many of you to show that video to your friends, to family members, And I think one of the reasons why I did it is in Canada they have the Let's Talk Day, which is through the Bell Media Group, and that's been heavily criticised for many years. With how that company has dealt with employees and employees publicly come out and said, look, there's things going on there. And another YouTuber who I'm a pen pal with mentioned it. But no, I honestly think, that I should link it into when I try and do sports and mental health and combine it together and player welfare. People aren't interested. They're only interested when like a star player's injured for 6 weeks because he's got a slight hamstring injury or he's got a groin strain. But then you've got to look at it from this point of view. So I, I'm a big advocate of, and when I say I'm a big advocate, if I could have a say, as like if they had a fan forum or I went to one of these public events, I'm a big advocate, and when I say this, the head injury assessments, when a player has a potential concussion check, right? They might be concussed. Even if they pass that check on the field or at the ice rink or, you know, whatever, there has to be a mandatory stand down period where they are regularly assessed because delayed concussion can kill. And one of my friends had a delayed concussion and he died in the arm. So I know what concussion is, and the more we find out about it, right? And when I look at the ongoing CTE lawsuits and the related lawsuits in the US and Canada in regards to the NFL, the NHL, and what rugby union, rugby league are now facing as well with potential lawsuits, and their reaction in rugby union is, oh, the knee-jerk reaction is we've got to change tackle height too much, basically. It's more down to no. How about firstly we just protect the players in the sense of you're possibly concussed. You've got to sit down for 6 weeks. Can't train, can't play. We're going to monitor you every day. We're going to regularly check up to see how you're doing and do it properly. Same with the other injuries, like players have mentioned how depressed they got with some severe injuries that weren't obviously concussion related, but let's say a shoulder injury, a knee injury. They've done their Achilles. They've had a hernia operation. They've broken their leg, and of course, they're longer injuries to heal from. Like knee reconstructions can take months, if not a full year of full recovery. So that can be really mentally draining. Um, when and I mean, I should know. I had a motorcycle, a couple of motorcycle accidents which have impacted my physical and mental well-being. Because when you're not able to work and being in hospital on a spinal board, it's kind of scary when no one tells you what's going on. But when I do it, yes, I understand people have said, "No, thank you very much for doing the content, really helped," but not enough people engage because it's seen as, "Oh, you're you're weak," right? And there's that. I am finding that attitude at my employer, and I hope some of my colleagues are watching this video because honestly, the way that my employer is dealing with certain things, and people have gone, "Hey, I'm struggling here," they're not interested. I've been told to suck it up and deal with it when I've actually raised concerns about how things are going. I've been told, "Ah, suck it up, deal with it. Give that so-called banter back." That's not helping. That's not actually solving the problem. You're just allowing a toxic atmosphere to persist because you're not willing to properly do your job. And and like some of the so-called banter I have to put up with, it's not funny anymore. Never was. And when we have a high-profile coach or player who takes their life, and it has happened in many sports over many years. We've seen it in rugby league, we've seen it in ice hockey, we've seen it in association football. We come out and go, "Oh, we're shocked." When actually they needed help and support for quite some time and they weren't. And because they felt they couldn't discuss it with the club or colleagues or whatever, um, you know, support network that was in place for them, that ultimately it led to a situation like Gary Speed, for example, and that should never happen. Or Rick Ripe, another one, or I did a video on this guy's coaching and playing career, the former North Queensland Cowboys and Paul Green in the NRL. Now, yes, there were obviously Paul Green's case. We do know he had really bad CTE when he was had his autopsy, and he declined very very rapidly in a very short space of time with his mental capacity and his health. But irregardless, it's still Gary Speed. We still don't know why he took his life. He appeared on live TV that very morning on live football broadcast. And then that afternoon, he was back on live TV doing the final score broadcast. And that is the terrifying thing. Now, Wade Belak and Rick Riven in the NHL, again, like, okay, they weren't superstar players like your Gretzky's and your McDavids and your Crosbys and but hey, look, these are high-profile athletes in the markets they played in. They were very well respected by their teammates and their coaches and the fans, and they died young. And yes, concussion could have played a part with it, prescription medication abuse played a part with it. But the problem is they didn't feel able to reach out and get the support required. And why is that? And then I use examples like Paul Gascoigne and Diego Maradona, Paul Merson, Tony, and I use the examples of high-profile football players, Adrian Mutu, who've had their issues with recreational drug and alcohol misuse and addiction, and the abuse they face. I'm not surprised they either relapse or don't talk publicly about their mental health issues. It's quite shocking, quite frankly, when you actually get down to it and discuss it. It is really shocking. But I'm glad the video helped. I'm glad it helped. That video wasn't well. I felt better after doing that video in myself because I yeah. But at the same time, I've can quite openly say yes, I have lost friends, and um, and it does have when you lose a friend to basically mental health and addiction as a symptom of the consequence. Basically, the consequence is sometimes it's an overdose, accidental, sometimes it's deliberate, right? Suicide. It actually hurts more than when you lose a friend to natural causes or a road traffic accident, for example. It does. It actually hurts more, especially when they die young. Like people don't, and yes, I'm more open about my mental health struggles and my battles, but people will try and use it against you. Don't. Now, I'm glad it helped. I'm not going to. I mean, it's up to you to say what you're struggling with. You don't have to. The fact you just said it helped says to me, okay, you are having your battles right now, and I wish you good luck in overcoming them. But I think when people try and raise the mental health aspect with professional sport, you've got to see some of the abuse professional athletes face and coaches face on a daily basis on social media. That's the public crap they face. God knows what's in their direct messages, their DMs, because some of the stuff I've seen is shocking. Some of the crap that goes on where they get sent private messages that are abusive. Now, this is where I think social media has ultimately failed. Now, YouTube, for example, I can read the comments and delete them. And they got rid of the messaging side of things a long time ago because not many people used it to communicate with their subscribers. But I have the settings set up where inappropriate stuff gets flagged. Now, it's not necessarily sent to me, but some of the stuff that's been written in the comment section is unbelievable. Unbelievable. It's disgusting, right? Now, I've had a few crappy comments posted to me. If you look at some of the live streams over the years, some of the vile trolling um, is embarrassing, and some of the comments that have been posted recently about the Cardiff City's new manager and the squad they've got there, and the Salah um, investigation with Emiliano Sala and his passing, and downright vile. And yeah, we can criticise players when they have a bad performance. Okay, he hasn't a good one. Managers, okay, it's not working. But some of the crap they like Harry Maguire last season, some of the abuse he faced was just ridiculous. And then we we wonder why when you know look at the Welsh rugby union side right now and the situation they're facing. And yes, okay, a strike has been averted in the short to medium term, but long term the situation is going to repeat itself. And Ken Owens, the captain, basically was. I can't remember. I didn't watch the interview, but I read transcripts about how the last couple of weeks have been very mentally draining for the whole group, not just himself as the captain. And the situation has caused problems for several players who don't want to be publicly named because they feel concerned about, again, the further abuse they're going to face on social media. And this is where I think social media and sport have got to find a compromise, because this is, I look at it and I look at some of the stuff that's over many, many years been posted, many. And in the beginning, yeah, it created more accessibility for fans, more, you felt a better connection with your sports team or your favourite player or your favourite athlete. And in the early days, the good outweighed the bad. But I would say just after the 2012 Olympics, the balance tipped. And in the build up, well, before COVID, the COVID pandemic shut things down, and then in the aftermath, it's completely gone the other way. In recent years, the general public have become more polarized. The mainstream media have definitely taken a more right-leaning agenda, and there are aspects of the mainstream media that have taken a very left-wing leaning agenda. And so, unfortunately, the silent majority don't speak up loudly enough and passionately enough when they say that is unacceptable, that is unacceptable, which is about 95% of people. They allow the very vocal minorities, the toxic minorities, to actually have more say than they actually deserve. Now, there's been a lot of misinformation, but there's been, I mean, the Euros, a couple of years ago, the Euros final, when those penalties were missed and those young players were slaughtered online. It didn't help their case that colour of their skin was brought into it. And I felt that was just really disgusting. And when I discuss my favourite sports and how I feel and my favourite leagues and favourite teams, yes, I'm a Blackburn Rovers fan. Yes, okay, in that part of Lancashire, there is an issue with integration of various cultural groups. It's true. It's not a pleasant discussion, but it's a discussion that needs to be had. And unfortunately, a lot of people in that part of the country in recent years have become very polarised politically. And it gets played out in the sporting arena with what happens at sporting events. It does. So when I discuss my favourite sports and my least favourite sports and how I rank my sports, football is one of those sports, or soccer if you're North American, that I don't enjoy as much. And a lot of it is to do with some very high profile incidents of a negative nature that have occurred. And how the footballing authorities and the game continues to face a problem of disturbances at matches, fans misbehaving. What we saw at the Euro 2020 final, what we saw at the Euros in 2016 with English, Russian, and French and other groups of fans misbehaving. What we saw, at certain tournaments in my lifetime, not just English fans, but fans of a variety of nationalities fighting, basically causing disorder, like Polish, Russians, Germans, Dutch. It's not just the English disease or the British disease. It's across. I mean, the French are renowned for it. So are the Dutch and the Polish are renowned. The constant pathetic fines dished out by UEFA or FIFA or the domestic FAs for fans dishing out racist abuse from the terraces. But a player gets fined more, I'm referring to Nicholas Bentner here with his Paddy Power boxes, for having a non-sanctioned sponsor as a personal sponsor. He gets fined more than a domestic football association, basically, and misbehaviour of their fans. It tells you where football's at with its finances and who basically funds the game. And so, yeah, I've fallen out of love with football a lot, and it's accelerated over the last decade. And I link that back in again to the mental health side of things. I think football is failing a lot of people in a variety of communities and on a social side of the game. A lot of people have been failed by the game. And then we've seen other sports scandals that involve other sports that, again, are quite shameful with what's happened with Hockey Canada and how they dealt with misconduct allegations against players and staff, with what's happened with the Chicago Blackhawks, with what's happened with US and British gymnastics, what's happened with certain aspects of the winner of the British Olympic and Sport UK's kind of funding structure, the win at all cost mentality and athlete welfare. You know, what we've seen in regards to the Welsh Union. Not just the financial side, but what's happened when people come forward and complain about misconduct and how they were basically not listened to, and there was clear evidence of rampant misconduct and rampant misogyny and poor culture within the organisation over a long period of time. And then we wonder why, so when I did the mental health video, yes, that was not a sport related thing. I linked it into sport, but it was generally like, hang on, this is the time of year when most people tend to struggle. This is a time of year where I'm struggling right now. It's a tough go of it, and yeah, I'm glad I helped. But then I'm linking it into the sports side of it, and we see all these scandals that are coming out, and I link it into the player welfare. But when I do the videos on the player welfare or athlete welfare, no one cares. And I think female athletes, publicly at least, are more open about the abuse they receive on social media. And that's a double-edged sword. That's a catch-22. They're damned if they do. They're damned if they don't. I have a lot of sympathy for them, but a lot of the crap, a high percentage of the abuse is aimed towards, male players, male coaches, and they're not as public about the crap that they receive. Because if they do come out and publicise what's going on, they're going to probably cop it even more. Now, I'm considering getting rid of some of my social media accounts. I am. I think Twitter has become the cesspool of humanity, and we can argue about the current ownership of Twitter and certain aspects behind that. But yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, look, there's no perfect solution to any but I think it does need to be talked about. But it's good that we've had those high-profile athletes who have taken their life or have been very public about their mental health struggles, and nothing's really changed. The sports claim that they've got these supports in place, the support in place, the support programs in place, and they claim they've changed about how certain things are handled, and constant inquiries and political and media investigations and criminal, and I don't think enough has changed. It is the win at all cost mentality over athlete welfare, and that's been a long term issue for quite some time. So we'll see. Anyway, moving on from that, I think I've covered that side of that aspect of things to death. I actually am looking at some of the football club history stuff that I've been doing, and the viewership figures. People are still watching. I feel that the response to that has been really, really good, and really positive, which is fantastic. Fantastic. And right, just get something up here quickly. Come on, work, damn you. But yeah, I think the responses to the football club history have been really good. They've been kind of fun too. to obviously do. I like looking at some of the, I wouldn't say lesser clubs because I think every club should have an equal footing at the start of every season. Of course, that's not obviously the case, but the history of shows that not every side's been dominant at any one period. It swings and roundabouts when it comes to club dominance. And this is why when people say of the German league and Bayern, they won't dominate forever. They didn't even win the first Bundesliga. That was FC Cologne. So that's another club that's on my to-do list. Um, and 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 therefore, oh, what's this doing? Just my YouTube's playing up now. It's not having it, is it? Not having it. Not having it at all. Right, work. My YouTube is not having it. Not liking it at all. So yes, in regards to um, the club histories, that they have been great fun to do. I think they're a nice change of pace, and they're kind of fun because there's no real negativity to them. You can find out some really obscure fun facts, and the response and the engagement that I've had from viewers has been fantastic. And you can't understate that, really. The engagement has been absolutely fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Um, Obviously, there's a lot going on right now that is negative in sport, and we have a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of negative headlines, um, and I think that the club histories, kind of fun. They are kind of fun, and I find them like really fun to research as well because you find out quirky little things and fun facts. Then you can link it into other videos like the collapse of ITV Digital, which has had an impact on a large number of clubs. I'm surprised it didn't actually impact more clubs, to be honest. So with the Southend situation, you know, I think they were having money problems and money issues long before COVID. So that's been a long time coming. But yeah, we need to have more transparency, and I will be looking into the regulator, the white paper, and what's been proposed and what's going to be voted on, and how that ends up being structured, because that's going to have a massive impact, a massive bearing on the game, and the clubs that are resistant, ironically, were the clubs signing up to the European Super League. They were the clubs that were most resistant to basically being told what they can and can't do, and at the end of the day, it, the club ownership needs to be looked at. The funding model needs to be looked at. And yeah, okay, if this was like a different political party, the debate around the football independent regulator would be different. I understand, the scepticism and the cynicism behind many people going, well, it's the Conservatives trying to win votes with this legislation. They're trying to keep people on side when they've been reasonably incompetent. I think it's a nice way of discussing the current political elites that are in charge. But the football regulator, I will look into that. It is kind of interesting with the situation with football club ownership and the direction the game's taken over the last 30 years. I don't think it's gone in the right direction that we were promised all those years ago. Naively, a lot of us believed it. And what we're seeing now is very similar to what happened to rugby league in Australia in the 90s. And guess what? The Super League lost. So when people are concerned, saying, "Oh, the European Super League hasn't gone away; it's going to come back," ironically, the Super League didn't last very long. It failed, but the financial implications were even bigger than the financial struggles teams had before. It almost killed the sport. And yes, it led to a restructuring of the domestic league system. It led to a restructuring of the finances. Certain teams did go bust, certain teams had to merge together, and we are still feeling the impact of the Super League war, as it was known, 25 years later. still being failed. So that is a very, very interesting subplot to to look at. So the LIV Golf, for example, and the debate about the battles between the PGA and LIV. Um, I use the historical examples to say that look, the Rebel League failed. The Rebel League didn't last very long. I think the longest lasting Rebel League going against the established order in the modern era, so post World War II, is the World Hockey Association. Um, is the league that I think put up the most fight against an established order, and it failed. It was throwing around money that it didn't have. It was claiming it had loads of financial backing behind it. They didn't do any checks and balances. And what we got out of that was the players had more bargaining power, and the NHL was weakened. But in response, the NHL really punished the World Hockey Association teams that survived, that were absorbed into the NHL. Um, Two of them have never won. No, one of them has never won the Stanley Cup. Three of them have had to relocate. Um, and all of them at some point, apart have faced money issues following the WHA merger with the NHL. But the rival league failed. It survived less than a decade. It didn't last very long. The International Hockey League was basically seen as a secondary league, wasn't on the same level. That also no longer exists. And so the NHL wins in North America. Same with the NFL, the XFL, and the AAF, and the other rival American football leagues, not called the CFL, have failed. The CFL is basically bankrupt. So when I look at what's happening in Europe with the battles between UEFA and some of the big clubs, it's a handful, really. Um, Ultimately, when people say, "Oh, the European Super League hasn't gone away," no, it hasn't. It hasn't. We all agree on that. It will fail again, and when it fails again, it will be even more expensive failure than the previous attempt, which three clubs are still clinging to. And I think some of the other clubs involved realise actually, if we can't get our customers, the fans on board, not only the fans locally in the local market, traditional fans, but the global fan base going, "Oh God, this is not good." Even though certain surveys suggested that younger fans were more in favour of it, clearly that whoever was doing that survey was either using a very specific sample size and a very specific sample, should I say, specific, specific. Yeah, words are hard. Words are hard on a Sunday lunchtime. Um, and were very specific in their sampling and who they were asking. Um, Obviously, very very quickly, the atmosphere and the feeling changed. And then you've got a couple of clubs saying, "Oh, we need to shrink the size of the league." Now, the French top flight will be shrinking by two teams, but partly because they've got rid of one of their domestic cup competitions. I think that actually benefits PSG more. It means a shorter league season, and but French football doesn't have the same broadcast partnership rights, TV rights, as the other European leagues. French football domestically has no money. And clubs like AS Monaco, who are one of the wealthier clubs in French, are going, we can't financially compete with PSG because they've got basically untapped wealth that they can spend at will, and we can't. And the broadcast deal collapsed during COVID. So when we are looking at the money in football, English football's in a healthier state than French football. Yet somehow the French have made three um, finals in a row out of four or something. Three out of four major international finals in a row, winning one, losing two. The French have definitely, been a very consistent national side at international level. Club level, it's a joke, absolute farce. But historically, the French league is more competitive than any other league going, with league titles being more evenly spread out amongst the clubs. More French clubs have won the top tier. Now, when we look at it, the French domestic TV deal doesn't exist. And part of the reason for that is COVID. Part of the other reason is the unstable financial model that clubs like PSG have now brought into the game, which ultimately is going to going to harm the game more. But ironically, PSG didn't sign up to the European Super League, so there you go. So some of the and when you can't get the big German clubs on side, and you can't sell your product really. Um, so yeah, there is a lot of subplot to um, two things. The So yeah, when we discuss the European Super League, and when we discuss uh, other attempts in other sports to upset the established order, the Premier League, this is very ironic, still is part of the same promotion relegation structure as the old Football League structure it was once part of. So they didn't fully challenge the Football League; they just were like got half of what they wanted. They didn't get fully what they wanted in reality, and in the end, it's still not a great structure. And club ownership's a mess. Football finances are a mess. In what should be ultimately the most profitable sporting industry globally, and it's not as profitable as it should be. Like basically, no club should be basically bankrupt, and they are. And so the question keeps repeating itself in regards to club ownership, club finances, and now it's got into other sports. And now we're seeing the broadcasters are starting to struggle in much larger numbers than what they were before the banking crash. And then we look at the change in viewing habits of the audience. I go back to this. I keep going back to this. And it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, so there's that. But look, at the end of the day, um, you know, I think a European Super League, it will rear its ugly head again in a few years' time. It will fail again in a few years' time. I think UEFA needs to look at itself and how it's structuring certain things, and I think the fan involvement and feedback from fan groups needs to be listened to because I think changes do need to happen. Whether we, I think a lot of damage has already been done. The structures are already in place now, so they're not going to go back to the old cup. I mean, if I was running UEFA or coming up with ideas, I would put more value on the domestic cup competitions, and you know, we could argue the pros and cons of how UEFA have decided to structure their cup competitions for clubs. I think they've got it wrong. I think many in the game know they've got it wrong, but the people who count the money going, well, actually, we're making a lot of money here. Now, then we have to look at the distribution of wealth and whether with proposed changes going forward, it's going to make it better or worse, and then we'll figure out from there. But I think it impacts the domestic league systems negatively, which then leads to further changes that we don't want. Fans feel we're not listened to, still feel we're not listened to, and the governing bodies, unfortunately, um, especially UEFA, are carrying on down a path which is ultimately going to lead with further battles with this European Super League because the way every time, well, the European Super League's been an idea for 30 years. It's raised its ugly head every now and then. This is the closest we've got. And I think the fan resistance should help in the pushback against European Super League. But I think some of the people who believe that they're going to solve all their financial and structural woes with it, so Madrid, Barcelona, and Juve, are, I think, only damaging the sport more. But UEFA aren't helping. There we go. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. I've got the rugby union to look forward to between France and Scotland. I think that's going to be a very, very good game. I think Scotland have a very good chance of winning in Paris. And then could Scotland be on, have a possibility of a grand slam? Because Ireland Scotland now has a different context. If the French win, okay, that changes things. But if the French lose, Scotland have blown the Six Nations wide open. So that's going to be a very, very interesting game. And kicks off in just under an hour's time in the Stade de France in Paris. That's going to be fun to watch. Really fun to watch. And ultimately, we'll see who comes out on top. But I think Scotland have a very good chance of upsetting the apple cart away from home. And then the question should be of, okay, the fact that Gregor Townsend's been given time, can Scotland translate what's happening in the Six Nations now with their momentum into the World Cup? Can they have a good World Cup? And can they upset the established order? Because I think Scotland, while they've been winning games defensively, they're still leaking points. They like playing an unstructured game. And with some of the rule changes and the pace of the game changing, fast-paced ball and non-structured rugby union is it sort of suits Scotland some of the style of play that's well rugby are trying to implement. So we'll see what happens there. But for me, thank you very much for all your questions over the last 2 hours. It's been good fun. I know I've droned on for a little bit, but there we go. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.